All right. Hello and welcome to the first chapter of the life and adventures of Robinson Crusoe, more commonly known simply as Robinson Crusoe. But as you can see, his real name is longer than how it's usually referred to, which is simply as Robinson Crusoe. This was written by Daniel Defoe and published originally in 1719. The original version is longer and more complicated, so we are reading an abridged version that has been specifically abridged for Puffin Classics, which is good because that will make it a lot easier for us to understand and for us to get through and work through together. So for today, Chapter 1, Robinson Crusoe. I was born in the year 1632 in the city of York, of a good family, though not of that country, my father being a foreigner of Bremen, who settled first at Hull. He got a good estate by merchandise, and leaving off his trade, lived afterward at York, from whence he had married my mother, whose relations were named Robinson, a very good family in that country, and from whom I was called Robinson Crusoe. But by the usual corruption of words in England, we are now called, nay, we call ourselves, and write our name Crusoe, and so my companions always called me. Okay, so just a little bit of background to that. Bremen is in Germany, so he's saying his family was originally, his father's family at least, was originally German. They have moved to England and they are living in York, in the Hull area, which is northern England. And his family's name was originally Kreuzneuer. Kreuzneuer. Honestly, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But they are now called Crusoe. And a translation I have found of Kreuzneuer is either nearer the cross or to cruise, to journey. And I believe, well, I'm just guessing, I'm assuming that Defoe, when he chose this name, he was being intentional, and it very possibly was meant to have this double meaning of nearer the cross and to cruise, to journey, because both translations, both meanings would be applicable in this case. All right. That was paragraph 1. Being the third son of the family and not bred to any trade, my head began to be filled very early with rambling thoughts. I would be satisfied with nothing but going to sea, and my inclination to this led me so strongly against the will, nay, the commands of my father, and against all the entreaties and persuasions of my mother and other friends, that there seemed to be something fatal in that propension of nature tending directly to the life of misery which was to befall me. So we hear right at the very beginning, we have some foreshadowing. We are being told that something bad is going to happen. My father, a wise and grave man, gave me serious and excellent counsel against what he foresaw was my design. He called me one morning into his chamber and expostulated very warmly with me upon this subject. He asked me what reasons more than a mere wandering inclination I had for leaving my father's house and my native country, where I had the prospect of raising my fortune by application and industry. He told me it was men of desperate fortunes on the one hand, or of aspiring superior fortune on the other, who went abroad upon adventures, that these things were all either too far above me or too far below me, that mine was the middle state, which he had found by long experience was the best state in the world. He bid me observe it, and I should always find that the calamities of life were shared among the upper and lower part of mankind, but that the middle station had the fewest disasters and was not exposed to so many vicissitudes as the higher or lower part of mankind. So essentially, they are of the middle class. This is a very class-based society, and Robinson Crusoe's father is telling him that it is the upper classes and the lower classes that have to struggle in life and have to face a lot of hardships due to their status due to their class, due to what is expected of them, or in the lower class, what is not expected of them. And that being in the middle class, which at this time is a growing and strengthening class, is the best, and they have the best chance in life to be happy and prosperous. After this, he pressed me earnestly and in the most affectionate manner not to play the young man, not to precipitate myself into miseries which nature and the station of life I was born in seemed to have provided against, that I was under no necessity of seeking my bread, that he would do well for me and endeavor to enter me fairly into the station of life which he had been just recommending to me, and that if I was not very easy and happy in the world, it could only be my own fate or fault that must hinder it, and that he should have nothing to answer for, having thus discharged his duty in warning me against measures which he knew would be to my hurt. In a word, that as he would do very kind things for me if I would stay and settle at home as he directed. So he would not have so much hand in my misfortunes as to give me any encouragement to go away. And though he said he would not cease to pray for me, yet he would venture to say to me that if I did take this foolish step, God would not bless me, and I would have leisure hereafter to reflect upon having neglected his counsel when there might be none to assist in my recovery. So as we can see, this is an older book, though it has been simplified and abridged for this edition. It is still full of these very, very lengthy sentences that you and I would probably not get away with if we used them in an assignment in school today. But this was the style of writing at the time. So back to Robinson Crusoe. I, that's Robinson Crusoe, was sincerely affected with this discourse, and I resolved not to think of going abroad any more, but to settle at home according to my father's desire. So Robinson's father has taken him aside. He's told him, don't be foolish. You have such a good place in life. I will take care of you. I will help you. You will grow on. You will prosper. God will look out for you. God will bless you. Do not throw. You have the world in your grasp, essentially. Do not throw it away to this foolish desire for adventure. And initially, Robinson's like, yeah, he's convinced. He is impressed by what his father has told him, and he decides, yes, he will not think about going abroad anymore. He will settle at home according to his father's desires. But alas, a few days wore it all off, and in short, to prevent any more of my father's importunities, in a few weeks after, I resolved to run quite away from him. It was not till almost a year after this that I broke loose, though in the meantime I continued obstinately deaf to all the proposals of settling to business, and frequently expostulating with my father and mother about their being so positively determined against what they knew my inclinations prompted me to do. But being one day at Hull, where I went casually and without any purpose of making an elopement at that time, but I say being there, and one of my companions being going by sea to London in his father's ship, and prompting me to go with them, I consulted neither father or mother any more, nor so much as sent them any word of it, but leaving them to hear of it as they might, without asking God's blessing or my father's, without any consideration of circumstances or consequences, and in an ill hour, God knows, on the 1st of September, 1651, I went on board a ship bound for London. Never any young adventurer's misfortunes, I believe, began sooner or continued longer than mine. The ship was no sooner gotten out of the Humber, but the wind began to blow and the waves to rise in a most frightful manner, and as I had never been at sea before, I was most inexpressibly sick in body and terrified in mind. I began now seriously to reflect upon what I had done, and how justly I was overtaken by the judgment of heaven for my wicked leaving my father's house, and abandoning my duty. All the good counsel of my parents, my father's tears, and my mother's entreaties came now fresh into my mind, and my conscience reproached me with the contempt of advice and the breach of my duty to God and my Father. All this while the storm increased, and the sea, which I had never been upon before, went very high, though nothing like what I have seen many times since, no, nor like what I saw a few days after. But it was enough to affect me then, who was but a young sailor and had never known anything of the matter. I expected every wave would have swallowed us up, and that every time the ship fell down, as I thought, in the trough or hollow of the sea, we should never rise more. And in this agony of mind I made many vows and resolutions, that if it would please God here to spare my life this one voyage, if I ever got my foot upon dry land again, I would go directly home to my father, and never set it into a ship again while I lived, that I would take this advice and never run myself into such miseries as these any more. Now I saw plainly the goodness of his observations about the middle station of life. How easy, how comfortably he had lived all his days. So he's remembering his father, who was in this middle class, who was in this middle station of life, lived an easy and comfortable life away from the worries and fears that exist out on the sea when you are at the whim of the elements. Now I saw plainly the goodness of his observations about the middle station of life, how easy, how comfortably he had lived all his days, and never had been exposed to tempests at sea or troubles on shore. And I resolved that I would, like a true repenting prodigal, go home to my father. These wise and sober thoughts continued all the while the storm continued, and indeed some time after. But the next day the wind was abated and the sea calmer. Towards night the weather cleared up. The wind was quite over, and a charming fine evening followed. The sun went down perfectly clear and rose so the next morning. And having little or no wind and a smooth sea, the sun shining upon it, the sight was, as I thought, the most delightful I ever saw. I had slept well in the night, and was now no more seasick, but very cheerful, looking with wonder upon the sea that was so rough and terrible the day before, and could be so calm and so pleasant in so little time after. And now, lest my good resolutions should continue, my companion, who had indeed enticed me away, comes to me. "Well, Bob," he says, clapping me on the shoulder, "how do you do after it? I warrant you were frightened, weren't you, last night when it blew but a capful of wind? A capful, do you say? A capful, do you call it?" said I. "'Twas a terrible storm." "A storm, you fool, you," replies he. "Do you call that a storm? Why, it was nothing at all. Give us but a good ship and a sea room, and we think nothing of such a squall of weather as that. But you're a freshwater sailor, Bob. Come, let us make a bowl of punch, and we'll forget all that. Do you see what charming weather 'tis now?" To make short this sad part of my story, we went the old way of all sailors. The punch was made, and I was made drunk with it. And in that one night's wickedness, I drowned all my repentance and my reflections upon my past conduct and all my resolutions for my future. So basically, he goes and becomes drunk, and he forgets all the good resolutions that he has made. Because, yes, becoming drunk usually makes you do very, very foolish things. The 6th day of our being at sea, we came into Yarmouth Bay. The wind having been contrary and the weather calm, we had made but little way since the storm. Here we were obliged to come to anchor, and here we lay, the wind continuing contrary, for 7 or 8 days. On the 8th day it blew a terrible storm indeed, and now I began to see terror and amazement in the faces even of the seamen themselves. The master, though vigilant to the business of preserving the ship, yet as he went in and out of his cabin by me, I could hear him softly to himself say several times, "Lord, be merciful to us. We shall be all lost. We shall be all undone," and the like. I was dreadfully frightened. I got up out of my cabin and looked out. but such a dismal sight I had never seen. The sea went mountains high and broke upon us every 3 or 4 minutes. When I could look about, I could see nothing but distress round us. 2 ships that lay near us we found had cut their masts by the board, being deep laden, and our men cried out that a ship which lay about a mile ahead of us was foundered. 2 more ships, being driven from their anchors, were run out to sea, and that with not a mast standing. The light ships fared the best, as not so much laboring in the sea. Anyone may judge what a condition I must be in at all this, who was but a young sailor, and who had been in such a fright before but at but a little. But the worst was not come yet. The storm continued with such fury that the seamen themselves acknowledged that they had never known a worse. We had a good ship, but she was deep laden and wallowed in the sea, so that the seamen every now and then cried out that she would founder. It was my advantage in one respect that I did not know what they meant by founder, till I inquired. However, the storm was so violent that I saw what is not often seen: the master, the boatswain, and some others, more sensible than the rest, at their prayers, and expecting every minute that the ship would go to the bottom. In the middle of the night, and under the rest of our distresses, one of the men that had been down on purpose to see cried out we had sprung a leak. Another said there was 4-foot water in the hold. Then all hands were called to the pump. At that very word, my heart, as I thought, died within me, and I fell backwards upon the side of my boat, where I sat into the cabin. However, the men roused me and told me that I was able to do nothing before. Was as well able to pump as another, at which I stirred up and went to the pump and worked very heartily. While this was doing, the master, seeing some light colliers, who not able to ride out the storm were obliged to slip and run away to sea and would come near us, ordered to fire a gun as a signal of distress. I, who knew nothing what that meant, was so surprised that I thought the ship had broke or some dreadful thing had happened. We worked on, but the water increasing in the hold, it was apparent that the ship would founder. And though the storm began to abate a little, yet as it was not possible she could swim till we might run into a port, so the master continued firing guns for help. And a light ship just ahead of us ventured a boat out to help us. It was with the utmost hazard the boat came near us, but it was impossible for us to get on board, for the boat to lie near the ship's side, till at last the men rowing very heartily and venturing their lives to save ours, our men cast them a rope over the stern with a buoy to it, which they after great labor and hazard took hold of, and we hauled them close under our stern and got all into their boat. It was to no purpose for them or us after we were in the boat to think of reaching to their own ship, so we all agreed to let her drive and only to pull her in towards shore as much as we could. And our master promised them that if the boat was staved upon shore, he would make it good to their master. So partly rowing and partly driving, our boat bent away to the northward, sloping towards the shore almost as far as Winterton Ness. So basically, they were in trouble. They were firing these guns, trying to get help. Another boat that was in somewhat better condition saw that they were seeking help and actually sent off what was essentially a lifeboat to try and rescue them. They were able to get onto the lifeboat, but the sea was in so much tumult that they were not able to get the lifeboat back to the original ship it came from. So they are going to try to make it to shore in that lifeboat. We were not much more than a quarter of an hour out of our ship, but we saw her sink, and then I understood for the first time what was meant by a ship foundering in the sea. While we were in this condition, the men yet laboring at the oars to bring the boat near the shore, we could see when, our boat mounting the waves, we were able to see the see the shore, a great many people running to assist us when we should come near. But we made but slow progress, nor were we able to reach the shore till being past the lighthouse at Winterton, the shore falls off to the westward towards Cromer, and so the land broke off a little the violence of the wind. Here we got in, and though not without much difficulty, got all safe on shore, and walked afterwards on foot to Yarmouth, where, as unfortunate men, we were used with great humanity as well by the magistrates of the town, who assigned us good quarters, as by particular merchants and owners of ships. So basically, everyone's treating them very nicely and taking good care of them. I'll just repeat that. We were used with great humanity as well by the magistrates of the town, who assigned us good quarters, as by particular merchants and owners of ships, and had money given us sufficient to carry us either to London or back to Hull, as we thought fit. Had I now had the sense to have gone back to Hull and have gone home, I had been happy, and my father, an emblem of our blessed Saviour's parable, had even killed the fatted calf for me. For hearing the ship I went away in was cast away in Yarmouth, it was a great while before he had any assurance that I was not drowned. So that, of course, is a reference to the story of the prodigal son, found in Luke chapter 15, which is a parable told by Jesus about a son who runs away from his father, who takes all of the inheritance that's owed him and he squanders it. And once he is poor and without anything, he goes back to his father to beg him to let him be a servant. And instead the father kills the fatted calf, basically this calf that has been saved for a feast, and celebrates the fact that his son has come home. And Robinson is saying that his father would be so glad to see him come home that he would have done likewise. He would have celebrated that he'd come home rather than punishing him for running away. But Robinson, unfortunately, continues in his wayward ways, and we will see that as we continue on with future chapters after this. So I'm just going to end our reading of our first chapter with a quote by someone about Robinson Crusoe, because of course this is sort of the first desert island story, or not really desert island but castaway story, and it has spawned many other novels, movies, TV shows, games. If you were stranded on a desert island, what would you have with you? That kind of thing. So this is what one critic has to say about it. It is not surprising that besides influencing later fictional narratives, Crusoe has also served as a touchstone fable about education, masculinity, economic individualism, Christian redemption, political foundations, and European colonialism. And those are all topics that we will touch on as we go through this book in sort of closer detail in our classes together. Thank you.